Well, hello, everybody. Welcome back to the second episode of the Things I'm Thinking About podcast, a ministry of the Men's Momentum Ministry here at CPC, where I'm seeking to share something spiritual, things I'm thinking about, theological in nature for the building and edification of the men here at CPC. So today's episode here at the end of February is about spiritual formation and authority and how authority can build a man or it can tear a man down. And so that's what we're going to be thinking about today. So I hope that this edifies you.
Lifting every weary soul through the cross and empty grave. Jesus, you were made.
All right, so in this second episode, things I'm thinking about, one kind of formation. So about 20 years ago, I was a sergeant in the United States Army, and I had just returned from my first deployment when about 3 or 4 months into my second deployment by this point, something had happened that I haven't quite forgotten. My boss, Chaplain Drake, and we were just arriving at a local dining facility when an E7, who was a sergeant first class, and he was 2 ranks above me at this point, he came charging toward me as we were arriving at this dining facility. And for about 3 minutes or so, in front of my boss, in front of soldiers in my company and other strangers just passing by, he berated me. His voice was raised, it was sharp, it was commanding, it was profane, and he dressed me down in a way that only a man with rank and even anger could do in that kind of moment. I'm going to spare you the details of what prompted it, but I want you to feel the weight of what that moment did and what it was. You see, it was humiliating. And if I'm honest with you, even now, even 20 years later, when I think about that moment long enough, there's still even a slight little faint of a sting. Now, time and by God's grace, forgiveness has done its work, but the memory of being diminished publicly like that by somebody with that kind of authority over me, it hasn't quite fully disappeared. Now, I'm not sharing that to collect sympathy points. I'm sharing this because it sets up a contrast of the things that I've been thinking about lately. A contrast between what authority can do to a man and what it should do for a man. So, a different kind of formation. As some of you know, I'm in the middle of my ordination process. And for those who might be unfamiliar, ordination in the PCA is not quick. It's not a mere formality. It's a very rigorous examination journey, including but not limited to written and oral exams on church history, Bible content, theology, doctrine, sacraments, the form of church government, and a thing we call the BCO, the Book of Church Order, and how we organize ourselves in our Presbyterian tradition. Just recently, I was reading and finishing up 2 books about the Presbyterian tradition and a brief history of the PCA. And interestingly, after reading those books, I found found respect for and appreciation of the BCO. I have to confess that in times past, something like the BCO I sort of saw as somewhat of a perfunctory manual rule book or for policy wonks. But I now see it somewhat differently. If you read the first 3 sections, you might notice that they are actually quite deeply pastoral when you understand some of the historical context that led to that formation. And behind these procedures, there is a steady underlying concern. That is, that the life of the church should be ordered with care and with decency and with intentionality. It reminded me of what Paul said to Titus, the reason I left you in Crete was that you might put in order what was left unfinished. Titus 1:5. Order in the biblical vision is not bureaucracy, but it is a careful organizational infrastructure that crystallizes how to tangibly love the church. So the BCO, though it is not inerrant, it is, you might say, our church leaders' way of saying these people of God are too precious to be left in disorder. So I came away from those books, interestingly, more excited about being Presbyterian and a bit more sober-minded about the weight of what it is that I'm being called into. Now, in the middle of all this, I've also been sitting in 1st and 2nd Timothy, reading them slowly and letting the letters breathe, so to speak. And what I've been thinking about is both the content of Paul's instructions and their deeply pastoral tone. There are many imperatives if you read the letters. These imperatives are not cold dispatches or commands from a superior to a subordinate per se. They are words of a father writing to a son. Timothy, my son, I am giving you this command in keeping with the prophecies once made about you, so that by recalling them, you may fight the battle well. 1 Timothy 1:18. Paul is not merely issuing orders. He's reminding Timothy of who he is. He's calling him back to his own story and calling him because pastoral leadership is costly and it's hard. And then he later on says, don't let anybody look down on you because you are young, 1 Timothy 4:12. Timothy is navigating a world of older men, established communities, and complex pressures. Paul's response is not a treatise. It is an arm around his shoulder. Don't let them diminish you. That is a mentor who has walked through fire himself and who knows what it is to suffer for Christ and refuses to let his son walk into battle unprotected. So before any of this goes on, though, Paul opens himself up. Before he gives Timothy a single charge, he lays out his own story. 1 Timothy 1:13, he says, even though I was once a blasphemer and a persecutor and a violent man, I was shown mercy. Paul leads not with credentials, but with a confession and an admission of his own dark past. Paul's story becomes the ground on which Timothy is trained to stand. And so this is the contrast that I keep returning to. Authority that tears down and an authority that, at great personal cost and extraordinary care, builds up. Now, who was Timothy? I think the church is loaded with communities of a community of Paul and Timothy's. So it's good to get a sense of who Timothy was, this young man whom Paul invested in a great deal. Let's consider how Paul's command and encouragements reveal something about the man receiving them. Sometimes instructions can be diagnostic, and so they may give us insight into the condition that's being addressed. And when we read these two letters carefully, I would say a portrait of Timothy begins to surface. So here's a couple of ways that we might think about Timothy. Timothy came from a home with a father-shaped vacancy. His grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice had passed the faith on to him, a faith which Paul calls a sincere faith, 2 Timothy 1:5. His father was Greek and likely not a believer, so Timothy grew up with godly women but an absent spiritual father. In view of this, we see that Paul didn't just mentor Timothy into ministry, but he stepped into a space that was genuinely vacant. Secondly, Timothy was emotionally tender. Paul writes, recalling your tears, I long to see you, 2 Timothy 1:4. He remembers Timothy weeping at their parting. This is a man whose emotional life runs close to the surface. You get a sense that he is deeply relational and emotionally present. This is not a weakness that Paul corrects, but a quality which he loves. Timothy was naturally timid. This is the most repeated theme across both letters. Here's a few examples. God has not given us a spirit of timidity, but of power and of love and of self-discipline. 2 Timothy 1:7. Do not be ashamed of the testimony of our Lord. 2 Timothy 1:8. Be strong in the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. 2 Timothy 2:1. Paul said these things to Timothy because Timothy needed to hear these things. Was Timothy tempted to give way to a spirit of shame? Was the call to be strong in the grace, were these responses to a drift toward weakness? It seems to me that a yes may apply here. I want us to remember that Paul wrote what Paul wrote to the Corinthians about Timothy during an upcoming visit. He says this in 1 Corinthians 16:10 and 11. See to it that he has nothing to fear while he is with you. No one then should treat him with contempt. Paul is essentially warning them in advance, don't intimidate him. Timothy's tentativeness was visible enough that Paul felt the need to shield him, even before he arrived. Timothy was a physically frail man. Timothy needed to be reminded of the gifts that were given to him, and I could go on. And yet, despite all of these things, Paul says elsewhere in Philippians, I have no one else like him. He has proved himself. Philippians 2:20 and 22. Among all of Paul's co-workers, Timothy stands out for his character and his God-given ability to care for the spiritual well-being of others. Paul trusted him, and with the most demanding assignments of the early church. You could look at Ephesus and Corinth and Thessalonica. What I believe about men, see, here's the reason for the portrait of Timothy, why this matters to us. Most of us are Timothy. Most of us are not a Paul. We are not seasoned, battle-tested, been through the everything mentor per se. We are the ones with an inherited faith that we are still learning to own. We're still working to learn how to fan them into flame. We're still battling our own fears. And for many men, we too have a father-shaped vacancy that we can hardly put to words. In light of this is why I think every man needs a Paul. We don't need a program, we don't need a podcast, we don't need a good book, though books are not nothing, as my ordination preparation has reminded me. But you need a person. You need a person who has walked further down the road than you, who knows your name, and who sees in you what you can't see about yourself, and who will speak plainly and lovingly and move you at the same time. Paul's mentorship of Timothy was unusual in that there was an apostolic nature to it. It was for an office, teacher, pastor, elder, but it still bears weight and relevance for us in ways that I don't want to overlook or accidentally flatten. You see, their vision is simply this: the older investing in the younger, the seasoned calling out the gifts of the unseasoned. A man saying, I see you, now let me show you how to walk. This is a formation that every Christian man needs, not just those who are heading into ministry. And some of us were given fathers who understood this and gave us something of what that looked like in our lives. Others, unfortunately, went years without anyone filling that role. And as a result, we improvised, we performed, we quietly wandered. We looked capable on the outside, but inside, there was a paralyzing uncertainty. And some of us are waiting for someone to come alongside of us and say, follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. 1 Corinthians 11:1. The ordination journey and process that I'm in is, among other things, a form of this. Men who have gone before me, who themselves have been examined, tested, found faithful, and are now the ones examining me. The structure of our church, the lineage of our Presbyterian tradition, and even the very BCO that I've come to appreciate in new ways, all of these are in part working to ensure that no man enters pastoral ministry as a lone ranger. My invitation to you, dear brother, let me ask you this. Who is your Paul? If you have one, a mentor, a pastor, an older brother in the faith who has poured into you, let me encourage you to thank God for him. And then ask yourself whether you are becoming a Paul to someone younger. If you don't have one, I want you to sit with that honestly, not with shame, but with clarity. A hunger you might feel for someone to believe in you, to know you, to speak into your life, to be for you. That is not a weakness. That is insight, in my view, of how God designed the way of spiritual formation for men. Timothy was not a finished product. He and you and I, we are works in progress. We're being formed and shaped by someone who took initiative and believed in us because they see what God is doing in us. The flame may be low. The gift may be neglected. The fear may be real. And the Pauls in our life, they come alongside and they speak words of life to help us to fan the flame, to not be ashamed, to go and fight well. That E7 who dressed me down in Iraq 20 years ago, he was not a Paul. He had rank and he had authority, but he used it to diminish, not to form. The contrast with Paul's letters to Timothy, they couldn't be sharper in my view. Most of us have had men like that in our lives. They abused or used their authority in their rank over us, and they left a mark of the wrong sort. What we need, and what God has given the church to provide, is something better. Men who lead the way Paul did, with their story open and with their hands extended and with the battle in view. So brothers, these are the things I'm thinking about. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about too. Let me know.